All right, hello everybody. Happy to be back again. We are finishing up part 2 of the worst documentary ever made. Just so happens to be an anti-vegan one. All right. All right. Hello, Ramel Loves, animal rights activists. Hello, Sam Smith. How you doing? Doing an oil change on my car today. Can I watch the live stream? Um, well, MZR, I don't know if that's a question, but if it is, yes, feel free to watch the live stream. I don't know. All right. Oh, okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. Thank you. We're just giving it a few moments for people to join, but again, happy to be here. Hope all of you are well. Hope everyone's doing all right. I'm finally over my flu or cold or whatever that I had, so. I'll tell you what, I'm getting sick of not being able to do activism. It's not that I can't, it's just it'd be like a 90% a waste of time. So I'm just getting sick of the cold. But luckily it's March, so I think April, right around early to mid-April. So I'm just trying to enjoy my time while I have it, I guess. All right, for those of you who haven't watched, or what? Sorry, for those of you who weren't on last week's live stream, or who haven't watched it, we are reacting to an anti-vegan documentary made by a channel called Anti-War Mindset. I don't know if you can see that if I move the screen down. So yeah, it's a smaller channel, but this video has like over 1,000 views. So, and I've never seen an anti-vegan documentary. So yeah, that's why I figured this would be good to react to. This is also a follower on Instagram requested it. So yeah, last week I know I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. Kind of a painful kind of fun, so it wasn't that enjoyable because it's anti-vegan. But it was pretty funny. Some of the things in here are just laughably poorly done. So hopefully the second half is as entertaining. Thank you again for watching. Hello, Utops, aka PJ. Some of your guys' usernames are very creative and kind of mysterious. I would never come up with any of these names. All right. Aren't too many people, but I'm just gonna get started because we've got about an hour and a half to kill. Now, once we get past an hour, hello, Martin Kevin. Once we get past like the 2 hour mark, I don't think I'm gonna finish it, but we'll see. Maybe there's a big, ending, big climax at the end or something. So let's just get started.
Fortification, which is basically GMO cropping in order to have crops that are higher in certain nutrients. But this has actually been largely a failure. So as this article highlights what is wrong with biofortification, malnutrition is the largest avoidable death cause worldwide. Biofortification has failed to improve nutrition despite more than $500 million in funding. Biofortification further imposes a yield penalty and risk of genetic uniformity. Thus, more land will be needed to supply nutritionally adequate diets with biofortification. Now, from the same report on yield penalty, In rice, increasing yield can dilute zinc content with combined selection for both traits, resulting in lower genetic gain than either taken alone. So basically, there is this trade-off between increasing yield or increasing nutrients when it comes to these.
So I could be wrong, but he's talking about biofortification? Biofortification isn't, I don't think it's the same as like just your standard fortified food. I think he's talking about when crops are fortified, like, or are grown to have higher nutrient levels. Like they're grown that way. The vitamins aren't added after. Like in fortified cereal, the vitamins are added after, right? So they add the vitamins and minerals to the cereal itself, which allows you to get a higher nutrient content, but it doesn't affect the grain or the ingredients while you're growing them. But he's talking about biofortification, which sounds like, just in here it says in rice, increasing yield can dilute zinc content. So it sounds like, and in the previous thing, it said there's a yield penalty. So it sounds like he's talking about fortifying crops to grow with higher nutrient content, or somehow, yeah. That's, first of all, that's not. You don't have to do it that way. You could just fortify the foods afterwards. Secondly, none of this has anything to do with veganism. So
these biofortification programs. Negative associations between beta-carotene and yield have been noted in maize and cassava, while a recent survey of 1,470 spring wheat lines in Australia found generally negative correlations between mineral nutrient content and yield. In sweet potato, beta-carotene and starch content are negatively correlated because a direct competition for carbon between the two metabolic pathways extends the analysis to the common genetic loci for beta-carotene, iron, and zinc, suggesting that the starch yield penalty could be even greater if biofortification extends beyond beta-carotene. And there's also another article that goes into this. So this is called Biofortification versus Diversification to Fight Micronutrients Deficiencies. And in the interdisciplinary review, there are several examples of biofortification combining high yields with high micronutrient levels. However, higher micronutrient content in genetically biofortified crops may be at the expense of...
Okay, so I was right. Yeah, genetically biofortified crops, you don't have to do it that way. You could just add the vitamins and minerals into the food that you're selling, right? Fortified cereals, fortified milks, fortified whatever, right? You don't have to grow the crops already yielding higher nutrient content.
Of yield. Concentrations of minerals in grains depend on complex traits controlled by multiple functional pathways, including absorptions from soil by roots, translocation from root to shoot, and allocation to developing grain. Breeding for both high yield and micronutrient concentration is challenging. Breeding efforts are further complicated by the environment, soil type, and soil fertility, which all influence micronutrient accumulation. As a result, biofortified varieties may require more nitrogen and more micronutrients in the environment to express their potential. The introduction of high-yielding biofortified varieties in cropping systems has thus often required the intensification of these systems, including increased use of chemical inputs and fossil energy, thereby increasing both farmers' dependency on the chemical industry and risk for the environment. Therefore, where agricultural soils are depleted, biofortified crop varieties rely on the use of costly inputs. In the absence of government subsidies, smallholders revert to local land acres with lower market value. So it's not clear that this type of biofortification is actually environmentally beneficial. As you can see, it may require more fossil fuels. And there's also another aspect to this, namely seed dependency, right? Seed dependency should also be recognized as a major obstacle to the success of any...
Daniel Income says, yo, sick buzzcut, love your work for the animals, we'll lurk this stream. Thank you. Yeah, lurk away. Again, just chilling. I'm just kind of just doing this just to finish this documentary. So, but for those of you who aren't subscribed, subscribe, please. And you can, if you appreciate the activism I do, if you want to support me, you can send a super chat or comment, a pay comment, whatever it's called. So thank you very much. And thank you for the comment on the buzz cut. Yeah, feels good. Feels good. I don't have to worry about it, about hair anymore. So thank you.
Biofortification strategy. This is partly true of family farming of the global south. Even if farmers receive the first seed cost-free when biofortification programs are launched, nothing is usually done to set up a long-term program. In fact, farmers are forbidden to produce seeds from the following crop cycle because seeds are patented. Thus, farmers' dependency on seed companies to be able to follow biofortification strategies is perpetuated. What is more, farmers often have inadequate access to reliable information when choosing transgenic crops, some of which may be associated with toxic, allergenic, and genetic hazards, hence jeopardizing the very purpose of farming. Indeed, adoption of these new GMO biofortified varieties could put the nutritional security of the whole food system at risk by introducing new types of toxicity. Yeah, this is basically like Monsanto did with many crop farmers who then sued these crop farmers because they have patents on seeds. I already made a video on this. Yeah, there are many problems attached to not just biofortification, but fortification in general. It sometimes doesn't work, it doesn't cover all the nutrients, and it has its own environmental costs and problems. So, and when it comes to the environmental footprint of supplements, there is also this article which highlights the
What is this? Hold on, this is hold on. Hold on, he linked an article from a supplement company? Look, it literally says at the top left, multi for vegans. Guys, this is... Last time I checked, an article on the website of a supplement company is not peer-reviewed research.
Environmental impact of the supplement industry. So it says right here 1.8 billion plastic supplement bottles are sold each year in the US alone, and many are packaged in secondary packaging. 76% of supplement packaging is made of plastic. While many companies have turned to glass packaging as a more sustainable alternative, glass generates more greenhouse gas emissions compared to plastic when shipped and takes over 1 million years to decompose. The vast majority of plastic waste, almost 70%, ends up in landfills, while around 17% is combusted and 3% ends up in the ocean every year. According to the EPA, less than 9% of all plastic waste in the US is recycled. Over 50% of the recycled plastic waste is shipped overseas, with the vast majority going to lower income countries.
Yeah, so most of the supplements on the planet are made for non-vegans, right? A lot of supplements have gelatin in them, right? So the majority, vast majority of supplements are not created for vegans because the vast majority of people are not vegan, right? So yeah, a lot of these supplements are wasteful and unnecessary. We know that, right? We live in a free market, right? We live in a free society. A lot of things are wasteful and unnecessary. We don't need 75 different kinds of cereals, right? You don't need 20,000 different kinds of, soft drinks, right? Obviously, this has nothing to do with veganism.
With ineffective waste management systems, around 3% of plastic waste ends up in the ocean every year, and this waste never actually decomposes. Marine and land animals mistakenly consume microplastics that can block digestive tracts, pierce organs, or cause starvation from the lack of nutrients. So the supplement industry is very harmful to the environment, as you can see. And not just that in terms of packaging, but also the actual supplement manufacturing process. As it says right here, most vitamins and supplements are petroleum extracts, coal tar derivatives, and chemically processed sugar, sometimes industrially processed fish oils with other acids and industrial chemicals such as formaldehyde used to process them. So supplements are also not very environmentally friendly, as you can see, and the supplement industry is also very badly regulated, so it's not very clear whether or not what you read on the supplement label is actually in the supplement.
High red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of a number of different cancers, including breast cancer, endometrial cancer associated with
in the supplement.
I can't understand her accent.
High red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk.
What is she saying? Hold on. It cuts so abruptly. I'm not understanding her accent.
The supplement.
High red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of a number of different.
Hold on, guys. Can you guys understand what she's saying? What consumption? I literally can't understand. Hold on.
on the supplement labels actually in the supplement.
High red meat consumption is
I keep hearing high in meat. What is she saying? Oh, okay. High red meat consumption? Okay. Why is this in an anti-vegan documentary? Hold on. Wait, okay. So why is this in an anti-vegan okay, hold on. Let's just
associated with an increased risk of a number of different cancers,
okay.
including
Agreed.
breast cancer, endometrial cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, and liver cancer. High red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Okay. High red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of bone fracture in women.
I'm so confused. Why was that in there? Oh, okay. I see. Okay, I see. He's gonna point out that okay, I see. Because like Nick Cage movies versus drownings and More Strange was so they're saying that correlation is not causation, and just because things are related doesn't mean that you can prove causality. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? You can still say it's associated. What are you talking about? There's so many studies showing that higher animal product consumption, specifically red meat, is correlated or is connected to higher risk of cancer, higher risk of disease, higher risk of heart disease. That's what blows my mind. It's like, okay, so if we're not going off of all of the peer-reviewed research, what are we going off of? Right? Usually the people who don't go off of the peer-reviewed research go off of anecdotes, unless there's peer-reviewed research or epidemiology that suits their narrative, right? So throughout this entire documentary, he's showing peer-reviewed articles and different snippets from different blogs, whatever, right? Those are also a lot of those are also going to be epidemiology, right? So they pick and choose the things that suits their narrative. Okay, this is acceptable science. The things that don't suit their narrative. Okay, actually, you can't. Correlation does not equal causation, right? Their threshold for evidence is very inconsistent. Hold on, I got to respond to a comment. Alex Duarte. So what is the effort with animal activism of the killing of animals, which is why they are activists, won't ever end? Animals in nature won't ever stop killing other animals anyway. What does that have to do with anything? Right? I'm not vegan. I don't participate in the exploitation, I don't not participate in the exploitation of animals because I think that other people won't do it eventually. Right? I don't participate in it because I think it's wrong and immoral, and I want to align my actions with my values, right? Just like how I don't think that, assaulting women is ever going to go away, right? Someone's always going to do it, right? But what we can do is people who agree that that is wrong, they cannot participate in it. And then we can create laws that help protect or help put, some kind of penalty in place. But separate from that, so that's one point. Separate from that, animals in nature are eating out of necessity. They don't have moral agency. They don't have the same intelligence. They're going off of instinct and trying to survive. Now, this is a hot topic, so I don't really want to get into it. But I, as a general position, think that predation in nature is wrong. I think it's bad. I think it's sad. I think if there's something that could be done about it in the future, that would be fantastic. But to say that a lion eating a zebra somehow negates or makes human vegan activism or humans going vegan like pointless or a waste of time, I just disagree. I don't see how that's connected, right? Just like how not all men are going to stop assaulting women, right? Not all people are going to stop assaulting children, right? That doesn't mean that We shouldn't, like, if you think it's wrong, that doesn't mean you shouldn't. That doesn't mean you should participate in it, right? If you think it's wrong, you shouldn't do it. And then hopefully everyone else who also thinks it's wrong shouldn't do it. And with more activism, with more argumentation, that will lead to more and more people not doing it. Simple as that. It has nothing to do with what lions are doing or what other carnivorous animals are doing.
She basically just splashed on screen these parts of studies, meta-analyses and some other studies of prospective cohorts that link red meat consumption to like cancer and heart disease or whatever, the usual stuff. But yeah, anyway, so why is red meat associated with this and that, right? It could have something to do with the fact that we have healthy and unhealthy user bias. Red meat is associated with all kinds of unhealthy habits that some people might have and some other.
So there are studies that correct for that, right? There are studies that adjust for that, right? They try, to the best of their ability, they try and isolate the red meat consumption.
Socio-demographic characteristics, lower education level and stuff like that, lower socioeconomic status, higher rates in smoking and all kinds of other things, higher consumption of alcohol, lower level of access.
I always love how like these random nobodies who think that eating like nothing but red meat or primarily red meat is like a superfood, right? I just love how these random nobodies, they act as if people who are employed, people whose entire careers revolve around nutritional science, epidemiology, doing research, right? Trying to find out more about like what makes a healthy human diet, right? These people, this is their job. This is what they're educated in. Some of these people have been doing this for decades, right? I just love how, for some reason, the nobody carnivore people just think that none of this has been thought of before, right? It's almost like when I'm a vegan activist and I've been doing this for a while, and on the street and somebody says, hey, you know what? I bet you've never heard this one. What about the animals that die in the crop field? It's like, dude, you really think we haven't thought about that? Like, you really think we haven't like addressed this hundreds of times? Like, you really think that the things you're pointing out, healthy user bias, unhealthy, user bias, whatever, smoking, being connected to higher meat consumption, lack of exercise being connected. You really think that the nutritional scientists, the nutritional researchers who conduct these studies don't adjust for that and don't have studies that adjust for that? That's the whole idea, right? And again, that's why you have to look at the actual study methodology. Notice how he's not actually pointing out that in this study, they didn't control for that, right? All he's saying is, well, it could be that, right? But if you actually read the study, the study will mention if it controlled for X, Y, and Z. It's just such a dishonest thing. They say, well, and then guess what? If in the study they say they do control for it, the next thing they say is, well, that's made up, right? So those adjustments are made up. Or they say, well, who paid for the study, right? They always go for funding. So you just can't win. But again, they'll use these studies. They'll use epidemiology. They'll use peer-reviewed data to support their narrative when it's convenient, right? So it's inconsistent. Alex Duarte said, but assaulting women or assaulting children doesn't happen in nature. The action is a human evil action that only humans do. Wait, what? Hold on. Alex, define natural. Right? I take natural to mean something that happens. Something that just happens, right? Something that isn't like, there's no like intentional intervention, right? Something that just happens. Yes, it does happen, right? You say human evil, you're using a lot of loaded terms. Like, what is evil, right? Are you implying like some God thing, like some kind of religion thing, right? Like assaulting women, assaulting children, those things, again, depending on your definition, but on my definition, those things are like They naturally happen, right? Nobody's like, what's the term? Nobody's like using a controller to manipulate these individuals, right? That those are just actions that happen, right? We recognize that those actions are wrong, and we do put laws in place to try and prevent those actions or punish people who do those actions. But to say that a lion eating a zebra is natural, but a human animal like assaulting a woman or assaulting a child isn't natural, that doesn't make any sense, right? You're implying that somehow there's some other force or some other symmetry breaker between a human animal and a non-human animal, where whatever the non-human animals do is natural and whatever the human animals do isn't natural, right? If the human animal does something bad, it's a external evil action or something. That's silly to me.
Size, more likely to be male, and all kinds of other factors that could play into these associations, right? And yeah, this is never addressed really, and there are millions of other confounders. So, and again, these prospective cohort studies, the way they work is basically they collect survey data, questionnaire data, which is not actually very robust data collection. You don't actually observe what these people have eaten or have been doing, right? So yeah, this is just not good science really. And here's also a good paper that sort of goes into some of the methodological flaws of these kinds of studies that sort of demonize red meat. Okay, so for example, states here, well-known confounding lifestyle factors are usually accounted for in observational studies by including these variables in the statistical models, thereby expecting that the risk estimates will be less biased, right? So they do this with multivariate regression usually.
Mm-hmm.
Residual confounding, however, is likely in nutritional epidemiology, given the complexity of diets and lifestyles and the limitations of statistical control for these relationships, right? So there could be measurement error, for example, multicollinearity, and all kinds of other things that limit the multivariate regression methodology, right? That prevents it from...
I would love to see this guy have a conversation with Matthew Nagra, Dr. Matthew Nagra. That would be interesting.
From giving us any causative evidence.
It'd be a very quick and easy conversation.
One may therefore wonder if disease risks assessment of single food groups such as red and or processed meat makes sense to begin with, and whether nutritional observational studies should not be restricted to dietary patterns, although patterns definition and measurement is also challenging, because relative risks for red meat tend to become mostly non-significant when controlling for known confounding factors like those shown for the Women's Health Initiative study cohorts. Right, so, and then we also have things like lower effect sizes when you actually not just use the relative difference in incidence, right, but also in absolute numbers. What does it actually mean in reality, right? And this is a perfect example, right? So this is an older study, talks about red meat consumption and animal food consumption and bone fractures, right? And wants to sort of associate these kinds of things. So women who consume 5 or more servings of red meat per week had a significantly increased risk of forearm fractures, and relative risk increases 23%, right? But when we actually look at this in absolute numbers, it becomes clear that this really doesn't mean anything, right? So we got 85,900 women, and
hello, Sabby Coops.
The study duration is 12 years, right? So we can actually calculate the person years of follow-up, 1 million something, right? And then we have to divide the arm fractures, right? This was like, what was it? 1,628, right? Divided by the 1 million person years. And then converting that to the arm fractures per 1,000 person years. And this would be 1.58 forearm fractures per 1,000 person years. This is the baseline incidence. And then the relative risk increase of 23%, right? Which means we go from 1.58 fractures per 1,000 person years to 1.94 fractures per 1,000 person years, So basically, we go from one arm fracture to 2 arm fractures per 1,000 person years. So as you can see, this is not really dramatic, actually, in terms of real world significance. And this is not even causative evidence, right? This could be very well explained by just unhealthy user bias or some other confounder, right? And I don't see any mechanistic evidence even why this should be the case, because a pattern of eating that is more going in the direction of animal-based consumption actually contains a lot of foods that have sort of calcium-rich foods in them, right? Which increases bone mineral density, for example. We can also look at the importance of meat for cognitive development. And this study, or this review paper, states over 200 million children worldwide suffer from malnutrition and as a result are underdeveloped both physically and mentally. Meat has more bioavailable essential micronutrients than plants and is the best source of nutrient-rich foods for children aged 6 to 23 months, according to the World Health Organization. Uniqueness of macro and micro minerals, association with cognition and health. Meat is a major source of energy, macronutrients, including protein and fats, and key micronutrients in diets. Relative to other food groups, animal-sourced foods, especially meat, typically has higher protein concentration and quality than other food items. The higher biological value of animal-sourced food protein is primarily due to its high concentration and digestibility of essential amino acids. Among these, the most notable is lysine, which is limited in many plant-sourced foods and yet critical for myriad of health outcomes, including growth and development, the absorption of calcium, iron, and zinc, building all proteins in the body, recovering from injury, and production of hormones, enzymes, and antibodies. Yeah, what you see...
Again, none of this has to do with veganism. And when it comes to plant-based diets, you can literally... you can get all the nutrients you need on a plant-based diet, whether it's supplementation or through or just by eating a variety of food. Hi Brandon, sorry for asking, but is that banging in the video we were watching of, or are you tapping your foot? I'm not tapping my foot. How loud is the banging? Do you guys hear like a lot of banging? Okay, I'll try and be more still, maybe. I don't know.
Here is the contribution of food groups to the global supply of nutrients from food, right? And so you got the red is meat. As you can clearly see, it supplies a lot of B12, and then you got the dairy in, I think the color is white or something, and then seafood also blue, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say the world is vegan, then we would have only the green color here. That would mean that pretty much 99% of B12 would have to come from pills. Then...
And what's the problem with that? Right? Notice how they just say supplements or pills and just blanket statement, like as if it's a given that there's something wrong with supplementation, or at least if it's a given, or that it's a given that that they're harmful for your health. When we know that supplementation is effective, it does work. Most people should be taking a multivitamin. Because why would you only rely on food when you can just take a multivitamin and make sure you're not deficient in nutrients? And again, this is the contribution of food groups to the global supply of nutrients and dietary fiber from food, with all forms of meat and human consumption. So this is what it is currently, right? That doesn't mean it has to stay like that. We can make alterations. That's another thing is people like to show you how it is now, right? How the current system is and say, look, see, if you just cut out meat and change nothing, we'd be screwed. It's like, yeah, obviously we'd have to make some adjustments if we're going to have a totally plant-based system, but those adjustments would ultimately be for the better, not just for the environment and for health, but especially for the animals. Hello, Stephen of Earth. Hello, nerds like us.
Lysine.
Pills.
Just imagine, like, the vegan world, all we would have is the green. So all these bars would come down, right? They would fall down. And
Yeah.
we would have to replace the difference, basically. So for example, the feed crops would be something that we would have to then redirect to human food. But if we actually look at some of these nutrient values for corn, which is fed to livestock, when we look at the amino acids related to daily requirements compared to ground beef, then we see a big difference, right? The graphs are on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So lysine, 73% of daily
Yo,
requirements.
what is this obsession with
versus
lysine?
6% of daily.
Also, they're choosing corn? They're comparing ground beef to corn? Why don't you compare it to soy? Why don't you compare it to wheat? Why don't you compare it to soy, wheat, and corn? Why don't you do a variety like most people should be eating? Again, it's more dishonesty. You know, when you eliminate ground beef and you only grow corn, you're going to be missing lysine. It's like, yeah, obviously.
Requirement, right?
Yeah. So you've got to go through and find all of the nutrients that are going to be deficient on Vegan World
Okay, here we
Day
go.
1. We're going to have to immediately start manufacturing all of the, starting with the B12.
That's
sodium.
sodium?
We'll move on from there to each nutrient.
Sodium.
But we're talking about some major manufacturing chemical plants, like some major infrastructure. We're talking like a...
Yeah, Stephen of Earth, I cannot wait for spring. For summer especially, but I'm getting sick, man. I'm getting sick of it.
Like cities that look like cities from space, but it's like 100 square miles of nothing but methylcobalamin and cyanocobalamin factories,
Right, and also when we look at soybeans, I mean, one nutrient that was also, wait, where was zinc here? Right here. So zinc, at least like more than 30% probably would have to be replaced. Again, this is not accounted for by bioavailability of zinc, but let's say 30% would have to be replaced in a vegan world. But soybeans...
Veganism means extinction? Okay.
...have little zinc versus ground beef, right? So even redirecting animal feed crops towards human food...
Okay, what about calcium? Oh, look at that. Soybean has more calcium. Soybean actually has, I would say, a better profile, at least in terms of like more nutrients or higher level of nutrients overall. But yes, yeah, nobody's saying you should only eat soybean. That's ridiculous.
Food would still require us to get our additional crops, grow additional crops in order to meet these nutrient requirements. And what we have to keep in mind is that there's a difference in bioavailability, for example, of vitamins in animal sourced foods or plant-based foods. Okay, there's a difference there. Okay, animal foods have better bioavailability than plant-based foods. Okay, you can see it in this graph here. The orange color is the animal-based foods and the green color is the plant-based foods. And you can clearly see that in almost every category of vitamin, there is a higher bioavailability in animal-based foods than in plant-based foods. So you have to keep in mind this if you want to talk about a scenario where we replace all the animal-based foods for plant-based food.
Folate? How much folate is in animal-based foods? Maybe the bioavailability is higher, but this doesn't actually tell us how much of these nutrients are in XYZ animal-based food. So that seems kind of weird. And also it's pretty even. I mean, it's not that much. I mean, yes, biotin, but other than that, maybe vitamin A. Other than that, it's pretty close. Like, it's not a huge difference.
So it would mean that we would have to eat more plant-based foods if we want to.
Dude, Stephen of Earth, that sounds awesome. I've never had smoky maple bacon hummus, but I would like to try some.
Get the same nutrition that we would otherwise get from animal-based foods, okay? And this is also a conclusion that this study gets to: nutritional and greenhouse gas impacts of removing animals from U.S. agriculture. And it comes to the conclusion that the that the food production would increase. Okay, so the crop production would increase if we don't have livestock agriculture in the United States. You can see it in this graph. So there would be more grain produced, for example. Okay, so more crop deaths in the vegan scenario, basically.
So the pie chart on the right is a vegan scenario, and the pie chart on
So that doesn't actually tell us if they're adjusting for the crops grown for animal feed. So I would assume not, but
the left is what we've got now.
Yeah, pretty much. And the good thing is they factor in nutrition. So basically, because we are missing all these nutrients in the vegan scenario, we have to produce more food, and that leads to more crop deaths. And this is what the pie chart on the right side shows.
So that's almost 3 times as much grain crops in a vegan scenario.
Yeah, pretty much.
So 3 times the amount of grain crops equals 3 times the amount of tillage and erosion and petrochemicals and synthetic fertilizers.
Invertebrates killed by agricultural pesticides greatly exceed all other groups of farmed and wild animals killed by humans. Okay, you can see it in this graph.
Yeah, that's a good graph right there.
Yeah, and this comes from
what is this?
Animal Charity Evaluators. So this is actually a animal rights organization. So this is not some pro-meat propaganda, this is actually their source pretty much. And it shows the truth, actually.
Hold on, invertebrates? Who are invertebrates? Like insects? Right? Are we talking about insects? Because yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of pesticides is to prevent insects from eating our crops. So that's not a huge surprise necessarily, but again, I'd be curious to see where the source is coming from.
Right. Yeah, here's the farmed vertebrates. So there's all your cattle and
and
sheep,
make sure they put an arrow
chickens, and
because the audience, they make sure they put an arrow because the audience that they're showing this to is they have half a brain,
etc. And then just the invertebrates killed by the agricultural pesticides, and that doesn't count all of the elephants that are killed for crops or
with the jaw bombs. Okay, it says some farmers deliberately target elephants with jaw bombs, often out of a vengeful response. It's not a preventative measure. No, oh my God. No, nobody is shooting or blowing up elephants to prevent our crops from being eaten. This literally states that farmers do this to elephants because they're angry at them. It doesn't actually say that there's any kind of system in place where elephants are having their jaws blown up or being killed to prevent crops from being eaten. Right? It's a vengeful response. Do these people not know how to read? Like these people literally they cherry pick not just certain pieces of information, but they cherry pick certain words in the pieces of information that they cherry pick.
or the deer that are killed for crops, or the raccoons that are killed for crops, or the possums that are killed for the crops, or the field mice and the moles and the voles and the snails and the worms and well, I guess the snails and the worms might be included in there, but no vertebrates that are killed by agricultural pesticides or other lethal crop protection measures are included in this graph.
Yeah. Even this graph.
The shooting show? What is that? The shooting show?
Actually severely underestimates the amount of crop deaths, yes. another study, examination of the interrelationships between nutrition, environmental sustainability, and food processing. And it basically looks at the environmental footprints of different meal plans, right? So they have healthy meal plan, unhealthy, healthy plant-based, processed, and healthy plant-based. Now they classify healthy and unhealthy along with some health index, right? When you rate plant foods as healthier, which is nonsense. Right? Yeah. So here's an example, right, of this type of meal plan. So for example, unhealthy would be white toast with butter, eggs, sausages, stuff like that. So basically when you go through this list, it's the standard American diet more or less, an unhealthy meal plan, and then the healthy is a little bit of animal products, but it's mostly grains and stuff like that. And
it's like the standard American diet. It's going to be about 70% plant-based.
Right. And
oh my God, what defines a standard American diet is not just 70% plant-based. There's different kinds of plants and plant-based foods on the market. Again, when you have and they did this earlier, a high amount of refined grain consumption or a high amount of processed food consumption is not the same as a high amount of whole grain consumption or a high amount of whole food plant-based options. Is not the same, right? Saying that the standard American diet is bad because it's 70% plant-based is not, A, it's not honest, and B, I don't even know if that's true.
When we look at the cropland used for these different diets, because they did factor in nutrition, as it seems, so they factor that in to some extent at least, the macros and some of the macros. But yeah, when we look at the cropland use, right, both the plant-based diets have a higher cropland use than the standard American diets, right, that have animal foods in it. Okay, so this is very important to also have this differentiation between cropland and land in general, because we can agree that land use in general might decrease in vegan world because the pasture land would not be used by animal agriculture anymore because it can only be used by animal agriculture and not for crops. So that land would be unused, right? Which is most of the agricultural land. It's marginal land.
That's marginal. It's non-arable. It won't grow crops.
Right.
They just won't do it.
Right. But the cropland, that would increase in the vegan world.
Right.
And that is relevant for crop deaths because crop deaths are mostly because of cropland. Here's also another study, telecoupled environmental impacts of current and alternative Western diets. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, if we were to flesh those numbers out, I guarantee you that there aren't enough arable acres on the planet to serve a vegan world.
Right. And this study is actually sort of going into this, more or less, indirectly. So what telecoupled means is that, for example, if the United States was 100% vegan, what kind of impact would this change have in other areas in the world, in other countries, from an environmental perspective, for example, because there would be a shift in supply chains, there would be a shift in imports, exports, etc. Right? So here's a spreadsheet that sort of looks at the methodology. So declared diets means what are vegans eating right now, right? So it's not some made-up vegan version of the vegan diet, but what it is collected from survey data, food frequency questionnaires, right? And it's harmonized, and it's then looked at what would be the demand for the items of that diet per gram of capita per year, and then what kind of impact this would have on bilateral trade and factor in crop yield data, and then looking at the demand for feed crops and all kinds of crop-specific changes, okay, in the crop footprint. And so they call it outsourced land footprint.
Square meter?
Yes, square meter, right, not quarter meter, square meter, per capita per year. And what is good is that they differentiate between different lands, right? So here's the baseline, the average American diet, and it has, for example, cropland for food, the footprint is 163, and cropland for feed is 26. Yeah, square meter per capita per year, outsourced land footprint. So if we add these two things up, it's 189, okay? Or if we look at the vegan outsourced land footprint, square meter per capita per year, it is 304.
Wow.
And I did the math on the percentage increase on that, and it's 60% higher. Okay, 60% higher.
Wow.
So
what do you think Joey Carbstrong would say to this? Because this flies in the face of everything that he says about crop deaths not mattering because most of the cropland goes to feed the animals. This shows that to be a lie.
Yeah.
Which means, in other words, the vegan scenario, because of the cropland required, goes from 163, which is what we would have today, to 304. Yeah, you've dropped that 26 down to 1, but you raised the 163 to a 304.
And also, again, this other study, diet scenario study that I've also shown. So what is good about this graph here is that it shows that even if we account for animal feed crops, there would still be a net increase in crop agriculture. So in the diet scenarios, we have the baseline here, right? And we can just ignore the green colors here, the green bars, because those are pastures and perennial croplands, which is not really sprayed with pesticides, right?
Right.
And if we ignore those green bars, then we see in vegan scenario, compare that to the baseline, and it's roughly 20% increase in the vegan scenario And again, it factors in feed grains and soy, oil seeds, right? So those would be reduced in a vegan scenario, but overall crop production would still be increasing. Can you say that cows eat avocados?
I don't know how they're interpreting this data. Also, even if crop production had to increase, that doesn't debunk or that doesn't go against the moral claim that we're making, right? Even if crop production had to increase, that's still morally better than enslaving and exploiting trillions, if you count fish, trillions of animals each year, right? Artificially breeding them, keeping them in factory farms, having, ripping mothers away from babies, slitting throats, shooting them in the head. Like, all these actions are morally despicable or morally abhorrent. So even if crop production, like, environmentally, again, from what I've seen, crop production wouldn't have to go up, not only because we feed a lot of the crops to the animals, but we're already growing a lot of food. But even if that wasn't the case, even if crop production had to go up, that doesn't actually tell us anything about the moral actions, right? That's like saying, well, if we stopped hunting humans, we would have to increase our crop production. It's like, yeah, that's true, but we should still stop hunting humans. Seems pretty obvious.
Mr. Vegan, the cows are eating all the avocados, dude. Okay, as you can see, avocados alone cause massive deforestation in Mexico, for example. Okay, so you cannot blame that on animal agriculture. Okay, but yeah, what do animals eat? Okay, apparently they eat a lot of grass, mostly grass and leaves, crop residues, and all kinds of other non-edible things that humans cannot eat, apparently. So there's like 14 to 15% of animal feed that we humans can eat, which are grains and stuff like that, soybean meal, maybe, if it's further processed or something. Okay, interesting. However, is this actually the vast majority of crops? No, of course not. Absolutely not. Okay. So this is FAO data, mass in kilotons.
Guys, you guys can hear me and the video, right? I just want to make sure. Nobody said anything, so I'm assuming, but I just saw that somehow the video was on mute or something. Okay. All right, cool.
Worldwide cropland production. Okay. So, and as you can see, what we give to these animals is not the majority in terms of mass, but we can also look at harvested hectare of land and basically find the same thing, right? So cropland production feed is like 1.1 million kilotons, and then if we want to include the oil meal, it is 300,000 kilotons or something. Together, that's like, I don't know, 1.4 million kilotons or something. Versus what goes into food in terms of cropland production, that's 2 million kilotons, and then processed for food, which is also food, let's say 1.8. Okay, so we have roughly 4 million to 5 million kilotons of cropland worldwide going to food, and something 1.4 million kilotons going to feed. So yeah, it seems like roughly 3 to 4 times the amount of cropland production in terms of mass goes towards human food and not towards animal feed. And if you want to say, oh, what about the byproducts though? Some of that goes to animals. Yeah, but byproducts would be produced regardless of whether or not animal agriculture was there, because the vast majority of those byproducts go towards non-food, which is basically human consumption products, as you can see in this graph. So yeah, in terms of mass, the vast majority of food of crops goes towards human food and human utilities and not animal feed. We can also look at this table here, which also shows this pretty much. Okay, total harvested hectare of land area, millions of hectares. Okay, human food percentage. Okay, and as you can see, the percentages for these crops are greater for human food than for animal feed. Okay, by final allocation.
Notice how throughout this entire documentary, they never once tried to make the case that, yeah, artificially breeding animals into existence, keeping them in cages or keeping them in factories, separating babies from mothers, and then after a very short period of time, after a fraction of their life has passed, we're going to bolt gun them in the head, hang them upside down, and slit their throat open. Notice how they never once tried to make the argument that that's somehow justified. Because if they tried to make that argument, they would sound like a complete psychopath, right? The only thing they're trying to do is muddy the waters, and for people who aren't ethically minded, for people who haven't thought about the moral implications of what they're contributing to, they're trying to muddy the waters and have people avoid that topic entirely. And the leading argument will be, that's why when I ask people on the street about slavery, about exploitation, about murder, about all these things that they're already against for humans, their first argument is, or their first response is, well, but what about crop deaths? Well, but what about all the land it would take? Well, but what about the nutrients, right? Because that's all it is, right? If you muddy the waters and say this thing is not doable environmentally or nutritionally, then it kind of, in their brain, it gives them a way to go around the, having to develop their moral values or having to think about what they're contributing to, which is really unfortunate. And it's a really hard obstacle. It's a really hard thing to overcome, a really hard objection to overcome when people have been fed so much information and misinformation. It's really tough. And it's especially tough to try and communicate why something, or try and communicate or try and have a moral conversation, a conversation about each of our individual moral values, when most people do not think a day in their life about others, or when most people do not think about the implications of their actions. Yes, exactly, Dandelion Gum. It's all a roundabout way to engineer and appeal to futility.
Here is, for example, a paper on Mexico. Does Mexico have the agricultural land resources to feed its population with a healthy and sustainable diet? And by which they mean the Eat Lancet diet, which is a semi-vegetarian diet. So reading a bit from the methods of this paper, the amount of food that needs to be produced for free food patterns is estimated considering the complex food supply chain, which is schemized in figure 1. Okay, so food intakes, diets, which were collected by survey data, food supply, domestic supply, okay? Then the crop production, animal products production, and the feed required for that. Then, of course, the cropland associated with that, which is what we're mainly looking at, okay, which is interesting to us, okay? Basically, the results are shown in this graph here. Millions of hectares, okay? The present diet, which was collected via survey data. Then the national guidelines, and then the Eat Lancet diet, which is basically going more into a plant-based direction. And as you can clearly see, there would be an increase in cropland production, okay, even accounting for reducing cropland for animal feed, especially for beef and stuff like that. But there would be an increase in, for example, vegetable oils and pulses and nuts and fruits and stuff like that, okay. Biodiversity impacts of recent land use change driven by increases in agri-food imports. And I think this is really important because these vegans, they always say, look, the vast majority of deforestation and the animals that are being killed by deforestation and the biodiversity that is being reduced by deforestation, that is due to animal agriculture, right? And this study here just completely debunks this 100%, okay? And yeah, I think this study proves, combined with other lines of evidence, proves that veganism or the plant-based diet, the plant-based industries, they kill more animals than animal agriculture industry. This study is basically like the final nail in the coffin, right? If there was any doubt before, now this doubt is basically 0% now, right? So let's just get through this. So
okay.
This study examines the link between biodiversity impacts from land use change and shifts in global supply chains from 1995 to 2022 by introducing a marginal allocation into multi-regional input-output analysis almost 80% of recent global land use change impacts were associated with increased agri-food exports from Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, plus Pacific, excluding China. Overall, more than 90% of global biodiversity impacts of land use change are due to agriculture, with crops cultivation 72% and pastures 21% being the main contributors. So, and with pasture,
Hold on. Hold on. Wait a second. Hold on. Here's the cherry picking. Ready? I knew something was going to happen. While deforestation if you read above a little bit next to 2022, while deforestation for rice and oilseed cultivation drove biodiversity impacts in Indonesia, deforestation and other natural land conversion for animal farming contributed most to the increased biodiversity loss in Brazil and Madagascar. So again, they're picking and choosing. Yes, crop production can lead to biodiversity loss, but so does animal farming. Animal farming contributes to biodiversity loss as well. They're picking and choosing. For Mexico, conversion of natural the conversion of natural land into cropland, mostly for vegetable, fruit, and nut production, was the main cause of biodiversity loss. Overall, more than 90% of global biodiversity impacts of land use change are due to agriculture. Yeah, it's just due to agriculture, just agriculture in general. Hold on. Also, does it adjust for the crops that are grown for the animals? Because I don't see that.
I mean, deforestation connected to pasture expansion and stuff like that. So, I mean, as far as I know, this study does not include pesticides and the animals that are being killed by pesticides, for example. It seems that this study does not even include that, right? It mainly talks about stuff like deforestation and land use change via land cultivation, okay? But as you can see, the vast majority of that is being driven by crop cultivation, aka monocropping, okay? And obviously, as people like Garland Farms and myself always say, that we are not in favor of feeding animals with anything that comes from monocropping, but actual pastures, right? And here's now some important information in graphs. So accumulated biodiversity impacts of land use change in potential species loss globally from 1995 to 2022, and the drivers in the global supply chain shown from different perspectives. So again, like the study main focus was on deforestation and land conservation, okay? And as you can clearly see in the graph E, the produced goods, right, that drive the biodiversity impacts, the species loss, basically the animal deaths, right? The produced goods that mainly drive this are plant-based goods, plant-based foods, right? So vegetables, fruits, nuts, including oils, rice, and other vegan food, right? Look at this. There's this huge chunk here, right? The orange, the light orange, and the yellow. And only a tiny amount of this is driven by beef, dairy, and eggs, right? This is the red color stuff here that you can clearly see here. And also like the pink stuff, which is other meat plus fish, basically like poultry and stuff like that. So it's like this tiny thing here versus this huge chunk, okay? So as you can clearly see, the biodiversity impacts or the species loss is mainly driven by plant-based foods, okay? Not animal-based foods, okay? And here's also another graph which illustrates this. Increases and decreases in biodiversity impacts of global land use change from 1995 to 2022. So the land conservation type, again, deforestation, and other natural land conservation and other land conservation. And then you can see the land use
Conversion.
sector. right? So, and the increases are on this side here. So vegetable, fruits plus nuts cultivation, wheat plus other cereal cultivation, rice cultivation, oilseed cultivation, and other crops cultivation. When we combine all these things, right, which is basically the plant-based industry, contrast that with the animal farming, right? Look at this versus this huge thing here, right? It's clear that the plant-based industry as a whole contributes more to biodiversity loss and basically animal death, right? It's very clear now. And again, by produced goods, so vegetable, fruits, nuts, etc., other vegan food, etc.
Well, first of all, I don't know if biodiversity loss necessarily equates to animal death. It could be that the conditions are changing in that area, which leads to either species of animals leaving the area or species of animals no longer being able to procreate in that area, right? Because biodiversity loss doesn't mean that these animals are having their heads chopped off, right? Also, biodiversity, that could also, I think that also, I don't think it's just, is it just animals? I thought biodiversity loss was also factored in like different species of plants that are native to the area. So saying that biodiversity loss equals death is not entirely correct as far as my understanding of biodiversity or what biodiversity loss means.
Versus dairy, eggs, beef, and other meat, right? Again, it shows you who really, which type of goods are really the main culprits here, right? It's the plant.
Right, and all this is fine and dandy, but you're not factoring in the moral atrocity that is animal agriculture, the moral atrocity that is enslaving and exploiting sentient mammals and birds and fish. Like, again, from an environmental standpoint, this is all fine and dandy. It's interesting. Again, I'm not going to take the time to debunk this. There are other people more qualified than me to review the environmental science and nutritional science. But ethically, you're not factoring in the moral atrocity that is the beef industry.
Plant-based goods, all right? And if you now say, do these things concerning the beef and stuff like that, does this include the animal feed crops? And yes, it does, right? It's not separated or something like that, right? The graph that you've seen concerning the animal products already includes the feed crop impacts, right? As it says here, if crops are used to feed animals, the land use change impacts of these crops are allocated to the produced commodities, right? So this is already covered, basically, right?
I don't know.
So again, let me show you the graph again. So other vegan food is this huge chunk here, this orange chunk, versus the dark red stuff, which is beef, for example, right? So when you buy a vegan product, it kills more animals than the beef product. It's
That's
that
not
simple.
what that said.
Yeah, I just want to say that we have an historical example of why insects matter, right? And this vegan idea of, all these insects and animals that are being driven to extinction by the crop agriculture, that this doesn't matter. Or some vegans actually say this is a good thing even, right? Let me just show you why this is absolute horrendous, actually, what the vegans are selling us here. So, okay.
4 pests?
Yeah, the 4 pests in Mao's China. That was one of the first actions in the Great Leap Forward in China, right? So the communist authorities, they targeted 4 pests. So rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. I think that everybody knows about the sparrows, like the Smash the Sparrows campaign, but not many people know about rats and flies and mosquitoes that were also targeted during that campaign, right? And it says right here, it resulted in severe ecological imbalance, being one of the causes of the Great Chinese Famine. Okay, Great Chinese Famine, which resulted in the death of millions. I think it was, how many?
What does this have to do with crop agriculture? Right? We use pesticides to prevent insects and other animals from eating the food that we need to survive. We are not targeting specific species of insects or animals just because they're pests or we're not trying to eradicate all of that. I don't know what this has to do with anything.
20 million, 60 millions that died. Yeah. So
How many?
we can look at, I think it was 60 million that died from the, it says right here, the death toll from starvation during this period reached a staggering 20 to 30 million people. And again, one of the reasons was this 4-Pest campaign, like the systematic eradication of sparrows and flies and mosquitoes and rats, right? This was one of the reasons for it, because of ecological repercussions. The absence of sparrows, which traditionally kept locust populations in check, allowed swarms to ravage fields of grain and rice. The resulting agricultural failures, compounded by misguided policies of
It says, while the campaign achieved its immediate goal of reducing disease transmission, the mass extermination of sparrows disrupted the delicate ecological balance. With the sparrow population devastated, locust populations soared uncontrollably, leading to devastating crop losses. So, okay, hold on. So, we use pesticides on our crops to prevent insects from eating the crops, okay? This campaign targeted 4 types of animals, or insects and animals, to try and prevent disease transmission. And what happened was, too many of the sparrows got killed, right? Too many of the sparrows were targeted, which then led to an increase in the locust population, which then led to them eating all the crops. How is this related? Can you explain to me how this is related? Yes, we know ecosystems are delicate, but what you're essentially illustrating is that if we don't control the insect population, if we don't control who or what is eating our crops with pesticides, that can lead to famine. That can lead to mass starvation if we don't have crops to feed people. I am not seeing the connection. If the only point you're trying to illustrate is that ecosystems can be delicate and it's important not to let one population of insect or one population of animal to get too large or maybe, sure. But that has nothing to do with crop production or ecosystem, because what they're essentially trying to say is, well, the plant-based diet would lead to more insect death or more biodiversity loss, which could lead to something like this. But when you actually read the details of what happened, a massive rise in an insect population is what led to the famine, is what led to the mass starvation and the crop losses. These people, dude, it's all right here. It's just, I always am conflicted with whether it's stupidity, like whether it's like a lack of intelligence, or whether it's like intentional, like deceitful, right? And I think it's deceitful, but what I'm trying to understand, what's the gain, right? I'm assuming anti-war mindset doesn't make money out of this, right? He's got 270 subscribers. He's got he doesn't sell any supplements, or they don't sell any supplements as far as I can see. So what's the gain? It must just be some kind of lack of intelligence and combined with like conspiratorial thinking, right? Thinking that the world's leading nutrition experts and environmental experts are somehow in on it and not telling the truth, or not, or taking like bribes, or taking, industry funding to spread a false narrative or something. I don't know what's the goal here.
The Great Leap Forward triggered a severe famine. So all these vegans that say, insects don't matter, all these animals being killed in agriculture, in crop agriculture, this doesn't matter, right? Or some vegans say,
again, the mass starvation happened because a population of insects boomed and they ate all the crops. What are these people talking about?
Extinction of these animals is even a good thing, supposedly, because they're not prey anymore in the wild or anything like that. Well, this type of thinking leads to something like this. Like,
nope,
the 4-Pest campaign is exactly this recklessness, right, that we see in vegan thinking, right? So this is just a historical example that
Yeah, and do you know what? Do you know what reckless thinking leads to in animal agriculture? Zoonotic disease and antibiotic resistance. Do you want another pandemic? Do we want another pandemic? How bad is the bird flu getting nowadays? Right? Not only is the bird flu increasing the cost of eggs, which I could care less about because you shouldn't be buying eggs to begin with, but eventually what is going to happen is this bird flu will start infecting humans and we'll have another COVID pandemic. Fantastic. Yeah, great forward thinking, animal eaters.
That shows that we cannot just systematically eradicate a huge number of any given species like that. So yeah, and when we look at China today, for example, there are many cases in which pollinating is done by hand. This is how badly they have treated their insect populations. They're pollinating orchards by hand.
Wow, okay, so you just showed us a solution. Even if the insect population gets too low, we could just pollinate it ourselves. What's the problem? Also, these are pollinating their orchards. Hold on. Okay, that's fine.
So they're not using like natural insect pollination because the pollinators are declining severely, right? And this has food security.
Because I actually have to read some of these because time and time again, they show one snippet of information and right around that snippet, there's conflicting information. So I've actually got to read this. So I'm just reading. It says, a recent report from the UN warned that 2 out of 5 species of invertebrate pollinators, native bees, but also butterflies and other wild insects, are now endangered. At the same time, studies conducted in North America have also shown evidence of reduced farmed pollinator numbers. Between October 2018 and April 2019, U.S. beekeepers lost close to 40% of their honeybee colonies. Well, again, we shouldn't be keeping bees. While it's typical for a proportion of honeybee colonies to die out over winter, this is the worst recorded winter colony loss since the survey began 13 years ago. Again, this doesn't show that it's due to crop agriculture or veganism, definitely not related to veganism. Practices associated with large-scale modern farming, such as land clearing and the use of agrochemicals, have all contributed to a steep decline in pollinators, which only undermines the industry's future. The loss of pollinators threaten not only the health and diversity of Earth's ecosystems, but also global food security. Yeah, I mean, that might be a problem, and we might have to come up with a solution to that. Doesn't debunk veganism, doesn't go against veganism. Also, if we can just pollinate everything ourselves, that would be even better if we didn't have to rely on bees. So I don't see the issue.
Food security repercussions. I mean, look at this. They have to physically by hand do this. And this is more like a band-aid instead of an actual solution. It's a very work-intensive process. And it says right here, what led farmers to hand pollination? Habitat loss and intensive pesticide use, right? As land devoted to pear and apple cultivation expands year on year, natural land has shrunk considerably, costing pollinators their habitats. So apple and pear cultivation, nothing to do with animal feed, by the way. Pollinators need surrounding wild spaces to nest, breed, and forage when seasonal crops like pears and apples aren't in bloom. In fact, multiple studies have shown that wild bees are generally only able to travel short distances from the nest, sometimes as little as 100 meters. To sustain themselves while out foraging for nectar and pollen, bees depend on nearby areas of flower-rich land where they can rest and refuel before heading home. Agricultural expansion has displaced and fragmented wild foraging sites vital to pollinators, severely limiting the food available to wild bees within flying range. The effects of this sharp declines in the number of pollinators in these agricultural sites. And then, of course, intensive pesticide use. China is one of the most pesticide-intensive countries on the planet. So, yeah, this is just very clear. on a national scale, China consumes 1,763,000 tons of pesticides per year, making it the world's largest consumer, with its application rates far outweighing those of many higher income countries.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy.
So
I don't even, like,
this
this doesn't
pesticide
actually show if
use
that's
and this
necessary.
habitat loss in crop agriculture leads pollinators to extinction, which leads to a situation where farmers have to pollinate by hand, which is extremely inefficient and puts food security into jeopardy. This is what happens, right? So all these vegans that say, oh, insects, they don't matter, they're full of shit. Of course insects matter. And I mean, look at this. So the FAO says declining bee populations pose threats to global food security and nutrition. So again, more evidence. Food security and nutrition depends on population of insects. So yeah, but insects don't matter, right? And
Yeah.
even the
As a vegan, I don't care about insects, but don't let me catch you eating honey.
yeah, exactly. And even the World Economic Forum admits that 75% of crops depend on pollinators. So a large portion of what the vegans actually eat themselves is provided by them by insects. And yet vegans say they don't care about insects, or they're
Again,
less
who's saying
valuable
that?
than a cow or whatever. This is just ridiculous.
Without insects, we'd all starve pretty fast.
It's not the issue. It's not that cows have more value, or like, well, I mean, it depends. I mean, again, insect sentience is definitely less clear than mammal and bird and fish sentience. But besides the point, it's the action, right? The action is what we're weighing, is what we're are morally against, right? So bees dying due to pesticides, or insects dying due to pesticide use to protect our food supply, yeah, that's unfortunate. I would love to find a solution, but that doesn't somehow justify the artificial breeding, exploitation, enslavement, and murder of cows, chickens, pigs, fish, right? It's not like, oh, well, your system still has the problem of insects dying, so therefore it justifies our system of enslavement and exploitation of mammals, birds, and fish. Somehow it allows that system to continue existing, or somehow that morally justifies it. That doesn't make any sense to me.
And no, we don't mean that those bold adventurers who snack on crickets and grasshoppers somewhere in Thailand would starve. Humans might be predators in the food chain, but insects are the ones to hold this chain together.
That was weird.
Footprint than animal-based food. And by the way, this 11% includes
Oh my God, what did I just
feed
press
crops.
something?
So
Hold on.
food.
Hold on, guys. Sorry, I think I just pressed on.
A female could survive
Oh, I just hit a
to
button.
hold this
Hold
chain
on.
together.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, add it to the list, bro. We got greenhouse gas emissions. We got global warming, climate change. Add it to the list.
They are food for some reptiles, small birds, and frogs. If all insects vanished, those animals would cease to exist too. The animals feeding on frogs and reptiles would be the next to die off, and then the ones further up the chain. Eventually, this disruption would work its way up to humans. Think you could survive by going vegan? Wrong again. 80% of all plant life on the planet is made up of flowering plants, meaning they require pollination to reproduce. Insects are the ones who make this happen.
It is an amazing system. It's just crazy how all of it just works, you know? Like, all of it just works. It is pretty amazing.
Physically transferring pollen from a male anther to a female stigma. You can argue that birds and bats, even wind, can pollinate too, but most of the work is done by bees, wasps, moths, butterflies, and flies. Without them, it's game over for most plants.
And that's the thing, is like, you know, you do think about, okay, well, everything kind of works, right? So you have prey animals, you have predator animals, you have a system that balances through prey and predation, right? So part of my brain is like, yeah, that makes sense, and that just works, but that doesn't mean that's the only way, especially with advancing technology, especially with the development of morals and logical thinking and like society, right? So, and also factory farming and animal agriculture is not a balanced system, right? That is completely one-sided, and they're all artificially inseminated, or at least 98% of them are artificially bred. So again, that whole point of, well, nature or, well, it's a balance is completely out the window when it comes to animal agriculture. But it is interesting. But as time goes on, as technology advances, as we get more advanced morally, or I guess, I don't want to say socially, but you know what I mean. As that gets more advanced, things should change, right? What once was balanced with greater awareness, with more advancing ideals or ideas, becomes imbalanced, right? Becomes immoral, becomes wrong, right? So I'm sure at the time of slavery, of human slavery, there were arguments made, well, it's a balanced system. Well, the population is delicate. Well, all these things, right? If you take away slaves, then our economy goes down, then their population gets too high, blah, blah, whatever kind of arguments were made. So, and for a long time, slavery was deemed morally acceptable by the majority, right? So just because something on the surface seems balanced or seems like that's how it should be, doesn't mean it should stay that way, right? Especially when there's very strong arguments to be made as to why it's wrong to, again, enslave and exploit animals. Well, again, I'm talking in the context of like lions and predator-prey cycles and ecosystems, which is not what we're doing at all. Right? The problem is our population is much too large to fit into any kind of balanced ecosystem. If ever humans started hunting animals, they'd all be dead tomorrow. Right? So maybe not tomorrow, but in a matter of weeks. So yeah, kind of a separate point. Dan Sue comparing slavery to veganism. Stop it, bro. First of all, I wasn't comparing slavery to veganism. I was comparing slavery to animal exploitation, which is exactly what it is. There's human slavery and then there's non-human slavery.
Depending on what your food preferences are, 50 to 90% of your diet comes from those flowering plants. There would be no fruit, no vegetables, no rice, and no wheat. This also means no food for cows, chickens, most freshwater fish, and all the animals we humans...
Right, exactly. No, just comparing slavery to slavery is a step too far. Yeah, exactly. It's just a different species of animal, right? Human animal and non-human animal. That's it. If controlling every aspect of an individual's reproduction, controlling where they live, their environment, and then controlling as when they die or what they get to do, if that's not slavery, explain to me what is.
Eat. It doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian or a meat lover. If the insects disappeared, you'd have no chance of long-term survival. You'd be left to slowly starve on a planet heaped up with piles of organic waste. Because not only do...
Well, apparently we can hand pollinate. So again, it seems like hand pollination is possible, so I don't see, maybe we could survive. I don't know. That doesn't seem like a definite thing.
Insects feed small animals and pollinate plants. They're also...
When did I assign human qualities to animals? When did I do that? Dan Steely Dan. When did I apply human qualities to animals? Or assign human qualities to animals? Just because a cow doesn't know they're being exploited doesn't make it justified. You could find groups of humans, like children or severely mentally challenged humans, who also wouldn't know that they're being exploited or enslaved. Does that somehow justify the action? No. Okay, here comes the personal attacks. You poor crybaby. Okay.
Major decomposers of dead stuff.
All right.
From
I'm
leaves
just
to
gonna ignore you,
corpses.
Dan, because you're clearly a troll.
That wouldn't be the world you'd want to live in.
the pesticide footprints embedded in world's consumption of different foods, right? So we got in the dark green color animal-based food. And the pesticide footprints from that globally is 11%. We got the plant-based food here in the lighter green color, and it's 59%. So plant-based foods has 5 times, roughly speaking, 5 times the pesticide footprint than animal-based food. And by the way, this 11% includes feed crops. So
wait, I'm so confused. I'm very confused. Okay, I see.
such as
Right,
grains.
that's important. That's what I was about to ask you about, and I want to repeat that includes feed crops, vegan. That includes feed crops.
What includes feed crops? Animal-based food? Where does it say that? Can I see something that says it includes crops, feed crops?
So when you come back and say, well, most crops are grown for animals, number one, that's a huge lie. And number two, the feed crops are already factored into this, and the plant foods are causing, what'd you say, 5 times more?
Yeah, 5 times the pesticide footprints than animal-based foods, according to this study here. The only feed that this 11% is not including is basically grass. But I will show with my next source that this is pretty much irrelevant. So here you can see the pesticide use on different crops, 16 different crops. And here you got grass, grassland, raygrass, cereal legume mixture alfalfa, and soybeans. Okay, as you can see, they got very low pesticide use compared to the human food crops, such as potatoes, for example. Okay, so no, the crops associated with animal feed, they don't use a lot of pesticides. It is the crops that humans eat that use gargantuan amount of pesticides.
Humans eat soybean.
Okay, so that's number one. Okay, so on animal feed, right? They are not very pesticide intensive, whether you talk about the grains or whether you talk about hay or grassland or whatever. Animal feed in general is not very pesticide intensive. It's that simple.
Let me interject real quick and just kind of give those people who are just tuning in an idea of what we're looking at here. These are the pesticides. This graph shows basically the pesticide footprint of each one of these crops. And you see the potato there at the end and the amount of pesticides there. The amount of pesticides are directly related to the amount of animal suffering and death. And we know that the animal suffering and death in crop agriculture every year is in the multiple quadrillions. And in every quadrillion, there's 1,000 trillions. And so what this means is that when a vegan claims that most of the deaths associated with destructive and deadly monocropping, when they say that is because of livestock, just this one graph here shows that just with the one crop potatoes, that the amount of animal suffering and death there is even so much more than even soybeans, that this one graph right here completely destroys veganism. Completely.
Yeah. So the vegan diet is
veganism
definitely more pesticide intensive and has a higher pesticide footprint, higher pesticide toxicity footprint. So this is already pretty much established. Given that this is the case, this feeds into the carbon footprint discussion. Let me show you why. And it's very crucial because a lot of these studies that talk about diets and environmental footprint are bad. Let me tell you why they're bad.
Okay.
Diet and climate change, a vicious cycle. This is one of the most important reports that anyone can read because it shows how destructive in terms of climate change pesticides are, right? 99% of synthetic pesticides are derived from fossil fuels, right? And they themselves have a carbon footprint and are sometimes greenhouse gases themselves, right? However, here's the important thing to consider. Quote from the report: virtually no study calculates the greenhouse gas emissions of pesticide use over the full life cycle of the chemicals, which likely causes underestimates of true emissions. So do you see why most of the, or pretty much all of the studies that look at diets and climate change, why they're full of shit? Because they're not factoring in the emissions.
Who would spend their time watching this entire thing? I'm doing it for some kind of tormenting fun and hanging out with some vegans on the internet, but who else is watching this? 1.2 thousand people clicked on this at least, or watched parts of it. That's crazy.
From pesticide use. None of these studies that say, oh, the vegan diet is so good for the climate, and it's only the meat that causes so many greenhouse gas emissions, etc. But they're not factoring in the greenhouse gas emissions from the pesticides. And given that the pesticide diet that is more pesticide intensive, it's the vegan diet, right? So this biases already all these studies in favor of the vegan diet because they're not factoring in the whole life cycle emissions from the pesticides, and not just the.
Right, they're omitting the majority of the greenhouse emissions from the plants.
Right. So all these studies, whenever you see a study that says the plant-based diet is the best in terms of emissions, and they're not factoring in the emissions from the pesticides, and not just from the application, but also from the manufacturing, then you know that the study is toilet paper, pretty much. And they also say here, research to date also omits the emissions associated with pesticide waste, such as obsolete stockpiles of pesticides that have expired, been made illegal to use, or are otherwise unwanted, and their disposal through burning and other methods practices common in parts of the global south. Right. So another source of greenhouse gas emissions that are not included into these environmental studies relating to the vegan diet. And we can get an idea of what kind of emissions we are talking about, right? Because this is one of the first reports that actually gets into this issue. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with pesticide production, transportation, and field application. The greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production, transportation, and application of pesticides are linked to fossil fuel consumption during these processes. Importantly, 99% of synthetic chemicals, including pesticides, are derived from fossil fuels, and several oil and gas companies play major roles in developing pesticide ingredients. Since World War II, pesticides have typically been synthesized from petroleum or petroleum byproducts. ExxonMobil, Chevron, Phillips Chemical, and Shell are all producing pesticides or their chemical precursors. Many pesticides are also coated in microplastic, which are derived from fossil fuels to ensure more controlled release of the product. So another source of greenhouse gas emissions that they omit, multiple pesticide corporations self-report high CO2 equivalent emissions related to their operations. For instance, 9.8 million tons of CO2 directly or indirectly resulted from Syngenta's operation in 2021. This is equivalent to the annual carbon dioxide emissions of more than 2 million passenger vehicles.
Peak phosphorus. We'll explore what peak phosphorus means, why it matters, and how it can affect our global agricultural system. Peak phosphorus refers to the point in time when the production and availability of phosphorus from mined phosphate rocks reaches their maximum. Phosphorus is a crucial nutrient for plant growth. It's essential for agriculture. It's essential for all life. It's a non-renewable source, and the concept of peak phosphorus highlights concerns about the long-term sustainability of phosphorus supplies for agricultural use, particularly as high-grade phosphorus reserves become increasingly scarce and more difficult to mine. This potential shortage poses significant challenges for the global food security and agriculture. Phosphorus plays a vital role in plant growth, especially in root development.
Yeah, it's like they're highlighting all of the scary potential problems or consequences of over 8 billion people on the planet figuring out how to industrialize everything, right? So we've pretty much learned how to make the planet our bitch, right? So over 8 billion people just destroying everything, right, environmentally. It's like they're highlighting the potential consequences and dangers of that, and somehow assigning all of that to veganism. And not only that, but also using that somehow to justify animal exploitation and murder and enslavement. It's not making any sense, right? Yeah, this sucks. This is definitely, like, a lot of these issues are concerning. What does that have to do with what we do to animals? How does that justify what we do to animals?
And energy transfer. It is a non-renewable source crucial for crop production. Today we depend heavily on phosphorus-based fertilizers sourced mainly from mined phosphate rocks. It plays a crucial role in various plant processes, including energy transfer, photosynthesis, and nutrient movement within the plant. Phosphorus is a component of ATP, the energy exchange currency for all cellular metabolism, and it is essential for the formation of DNA and RNA. It also contributes to root development, flower and seed production, and ensures plants to maximize their full potential. Phosphorus is considered a non-renewable resource because it is primarily obtained from phosphate rock, a finite resource formed over millions of years through geological processes. Unlike renewable resources, which can be replenished or regenerated over a relatively short time, the formation of new phosphate rock deposits is not foreseeable on a human timescale. Current phosphorus reserves are being depleted due to extensive mining for agricultural fertilizers, and no synthetic alternative exists. This finite nature of phosphorus reserves raises concerns about the long-term supply and the sustainability, particularly given its crucial role in agriculture and global food security.
Now I've found evidence that reveals that veganism is, in fact, the absolute darling of the industrial fertilizer industry. I ran across this 2019 annual report by one of the world's leading mined and synthetic fertilizer producers.
A global leader.
And we see them addressing veganism down here on page 15. The growth of veganism in the developed world will go some way towards balancing this trend. However, while the rate of increase may appear impressive, those identifying as vegan still only account for a small proportion of the total population. The actual increase was from 1% to 6% of the population. All this means that veganism needs to progress much more to have a really meaningful impact on global production. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt, despite what prominent vegan activists like to tell their followers. The industries that are polluting our drinking water, causing oceanic dead zones, killing wildlife in untold numbers, as well as...
What about the waste runoff from factory farms? Right? I forgot what they call them, but they literally, all the piss and shit from the animals gets there's piss and shit runoff that goes into bodies of water that contaminates the water completely. Right? There's plenty of dead zones from factory farms. And also, I was going to respond to Cuz D. The usual theory is that if you eat nothing but cows, you bypass all damage caused by agriculture. Problem with that is there actually is science supporting the fact that red meat or beef is harmful for human health long term. And that's in combination of other things. Forget about only eating nothing but beef. So, like, if we want to talk about what's not doable, let's say, right, that somehow if we exploit no one but cows, if we only exploit cows, if we only artificially inseminate, breed, exploit, murder, whatever cows, we can avoid all this environmental damage. We could avoid exploiting other species of animals. It would be like, that's it. It's the one sacrifice, one bullet bite. You're not going to live very long if you eat nothing but beef, if you eat nothing but cows, right? So what's the end goal, right? Clearly, we need a better solution than, okay, let's stop producing crops and let's just breed and exploit what will probably need even more billions of cows to sustain human life. That's not going to work. Nutritionally, it's not going to work, or it's not going to be optimal. And then environmentally, I don't even know if it's doable, especially with the free range grass-fed cow system that most of these people advocate for.
Causing disease in human beings are expecting to considerably increase production.
Perhaps even use some of the current agricultural land for rewilding. So far, we've only looked at what's possible today, but innovations could also reshape the food landscape.
See, this is an appeal to ignorance. Well, we don't know what we don't know, so we can
Rewilding.
And also rewilding. Again, I'm not convinced that we would just leave this agricultural land be. I think that this would be used by big corporations, like, I don't know, like the probably the big corporations that push veganism. They would probably use that land that would
big corporations
was previously used by
big corporation that push veganism. I don't know, but that's more French. I don't know, but you know, he's like big corporations like I don't know, you know, those big corporations that push veganism, because they don't exist, right? Sure, they definitely have funding from big corporations, and obviously the plant-based products need support, right, financially, but there are no big corporations pushing a moral philosophy, right, pushing veganism. That just doesn't exist, right? There are big corporations supporting the beef industry and supporting the dairy industry or dairy production. That's correct. Just like there may be big corporations or big companies trying to finance the development of plant-based products, but there are no big corporations pushing veganism.
By livestock agriculture, and they would turn it. They would build some factories there. They would build some that produce some fake meat or something.
Yeah, big kale. Yeah, Sabby Coops, I am the big corporation. I'm pushing veganism, and I'm funding it. I'm funding it, baby. I'm the big corporation. This is my favorite, when it's just silent. When it's just silent screen grabs. I don't know if I'm like extra tired today, or if this documentary is boring me to shit, because I've yawned like 6 times. Anyone else like struggle with the time change? I hate that we do that. Why the fuck do we do that? Why do we change the time? That's annoying, right? Last night, I do stay up pretty late, but last night it was like 1:30 or 2 o'clock, and then all of a sudden I look down, it's 3 o'clock. I'm like, holy shit, I gotta go to sleep. Yeah, no, it's crazy. I hate that.
Say, oh, but there are billions of animals being bred into existence to then be slaughtered, and they make it seem like we just created out of nowhere these additional billions of animals. But there's actually data that shows that during the late Pleistocene, there have been similar herbivore densities than today, right? So it's actually not unnatural to have these billions amounts of large ruminant animals roaming around, right? This is well within the natural equilibrium. And so these animals would probably exist in similar numbers, even if we humans wouldn't have animal agriculture. Because
have you seen the data that I had pulled up on this? I couldn't get it from one study like this. It came from I actually was doing the study, and so I was pulling from all of these different sources, showing different estimated populations of pre-European settlement of the North American continent, which are within the border of what's the continental United States. And before it was settled, when it was wild, so to speak, there were 160 million ruminant animals on that property, which is the continental United States. That would include the bison, the moose, the deer.
Guys, I can't do this. I can't do this. I got like 20 more minutes in me, guys. I'm wrapping this up. This is like painful. I don't know if I'm tired today or what, but this is just fucking kill me, dude.
The elk, the sheep, the goats, everything. About 160 million. Today, that's about 110 million. And so we've actually got substantially fewer ruminants on that same continental United States as existed, say, 300 years ago.
Right. So it just shows you this common vegan argument, oh, we're breeding all these animals into existence. It's nonsense. The animals breed themselves into existence, right? So another nonsensical argument basically from the vegans, livestock can sequester carbon into the soil, right? You covered this multiple times on your channel. And they have the potential to be even carbon neutral or even carbon negative. But then there are vegans who cast doubt on that and are citing this Oxford report called Grazed and Confused. That's like their go-to source when they want to say this carbon sequestration and regenerative grazing is nonsense or whatever, and it's not working. They're saying that there's like a limit to the amount of carbon that can be stored and things like that, right? Or it has limited potential or something. But great rebuttal to that, actually.
Confused indeed.
Yeah, this is a Substack article that I can recommend everyone reads by Gunnar Rundgren, and he does a lot of great work.
It's a Substack article. Okay, so in response to an Oxford research paper, you show us a Substack article by a random person. Okay, great.
By the way, on these kinds of issues, and he gives his critique on Grazed and Confused, and he points out various different things. Wait a second. So, for example, the calculations of carbon sequestration in the report are based on several weaknesses. Measurements of carbon are mostly only in the upper layer of soil, often the top 30 centimeters, and sometimes as little as the top 10 centimeters. Most studies which have supplied the data from the report have been interested in changes in soil organic matter as a measure of soil fertility and not the potential for carbon sequestration. For that purpose, these shallow measurements are quite okay, but the stable carbon fractions, which can be stored over a long time, are found deeper down. So they're using biased sources in this report.
Right. So what you're telling me is that these vegans that have tried to debunk regenerative ruminant grazing operations by saying that there's only a limited amount of carbon that can be sequestered are relying upon biased sources that are limiting, for no good reason, the depth at which they measure carbon in the soil.
Exactly. Yeah. And it also says here, admittedly, the carbon content deeper down is lower, but it is a lot more stable. Grassland has a very high proportion of below ground biomass and deep roots. Therefore, the carbon stored by grasslands is likely to be distributed deeper than in arable land. According to Jackson et al., 2017, native grasslands allocate around 60% of primary production to roots, croplands 10%, and for forests 20%. Measuring carbon content in a specific layer of the soil and using that as a measure of carbon sequestration omits what happens with the soil in total. Soil can grow deeper by root activity and higher by accumulation of litter and dust on the top. This is how soil is made in the first place. One can very well sequester a lot of carbon in a soil while the carbon content 0 to 30 centimeters remains constant.
Yeah.
Measurements are mostly on carbon, not differentiating between different forms of carbon. The soil, while it is well known that there are only some fractions of carbon which are stable. The authors claim that the carbon sequestration is most likely to take place in degraded soils, but the evidence for this is not at all conclusive. Many of the best soils in the world have been accumulating carbon for a very long term, and many of the poor soils have been poor for a very long time. From a practical farming perspective, the experience is rather the opposite. A good soil can go on accumulating carbon for ages. While it is a lot harder, but not impossible, to increase soil organic matter in poor soils, in poor climates.
Yeah. And that makes sense, because the less water, the less precipitation you have, the poorer the soil will be, because less vegetation is able to grow. If less vegetation is able to grow and live, then less vegetation is able to die. And if less vegetation is able to die, then less carbon is going to enter the soil. And the less ruminant action you're going to get. The more ruminant action you get, in other words, the more herbivore.
The more ruminant action. These guys better calm down.
Stock that are properly managed, then the better the carbon content of the soil is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense. I mean, this blog post makes many great points, and is a great rebuttal towards this grazed and confused propaganda piece by the University of Oxford, which has a relationship to Monsanto. But vegans are just not caring about that conflict of interest at all, apparently. It also says here the report deals very lightly with the topic of ruminants, grass interactions, and gives the impression that the existence of ruminants in grasslands has little significance compared to non-grazed.
All right, guys.
The role of the manure.
Here's what I'm gonna do. I can't do this. I can't do another 25 minutes. I'm gonna go to the last 10 minutes. Yeah, let's go to the last 10 minutes. I just want to see if it's gonna end with anything. I was curious how it's gonna end. Is he just gonna end it, or is it going to be some kind of like conclusion? I just want to see it.
Example in red. Yeah. And what food has the higher contributor to water use or fresh water use?
By far is plant-based foods.
Yeah. So we live in a world in which water is scarce, actually, and we cannot just use
I agree. I think it's literally just going to end
and waste that. We have to be careful with that. And as you can see in a vegan world, according to the World Wildlife Fund, a vegan Germany would use more water. Now let me actually show you the actual reasons why this vegan stuff is being pushed, okay? It's for profit, okay? Meat versus plants, a key business ratio.
Oh my God.
Comparison.
I'm glad. I'm glad that's how he's ending it. A fucking conspiracy theory.
Okay. Profitability ratios. Plant-based industries have a higher return on sales or profits after taxes from the year's sales by a factor of 0.39%. Plant-based industries have a higher return on assets or the after-tax earnings of assets by a factor of 0.98%. The authors note
I hope
that
no injustice
while
lasts
this
forever. I hope
difference
that's how
may
it
appear
ends.
small, depending on the revenues generated, it can represent millions of dollars. Plant-based industries have a higher return on the capital invested by the owners or stockholders by a factor of 2.46%. The authors state that this ratio shows that plant-based industries generate more profits for every dollar invested by the shareholders than animal-based industries. This is what drives veganism, okay? Not the...
No, that's not what drives veganism. Sure, yeah, our rich investors may be supporting plant-based companies or plant-based food products because they think it'll give a high return on their investment. Sure. Great. Yeah, maybe. Right? I mean, we are under capitalism, right? People do have the right to invest their money and make businesses and make money, right? So, but that is not the driving motivation behind veganism at all.
So-called concern for the animals or for human health or environmentalism or anything like that. It is 100% profit-driven, okay? Corporate capitalist, venture capitalist driven.
Yeah,
okay?
plant-based industries,
and
maybe.
Now, I don't know how
Not broccoli.
unbiased this analysis of the profitability of plant-based industries is, because this comes from Faunalytics, which is itself a vegan animal rights organization. But I can definitely see that when it comes to some plant-based mock meat products, that the production cost is probably lower, okay, because it's very cheap ingredients. And if the demand for it was actually there, then it would generate a higher profit margin. The potential for higher profitability is there, and this is why they're trying to get rid of the animal-based competition and consolidate and monopolize the food market. Okay, this is all about
Monopolize the food market.
monopolization of the market, and this is all about controlling the food supply.
The final part of this series will demonstrate how the previously discussed actors come together through public-private partnerships to effectively advance their varied agendas at both national and global levels. The number of these partnerships is simply overwhelming. They come under various names and acronyms, but often include the same key players, such as the EAT Foundation, the Stockholm Resilience Centre, the World Resources Institute, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, certain factions of the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum, which epitomizes the public-private partnership model.
It's less anti-livestock and it's more pro-animal rights, pro-sentient being equality, right? So like it's less anti-livestock and more that. But yeah, if you think about the word livestock, right? Like living sentient being stock, like money, profit, right? So livestock is a business. Livestock is literally a very profitable, or at least it has been a very profitable business. Not for long, hopefully, but.
Consider one of the largest formations, an umbrella group known as the Global Commons Alliance, a group that openly declares it has a plan for the planet. Some of the members are reputable organizations, making it even more astonishing that extreme anti-livestock sentiment can reach such heights. Take, for instance, the United Nations Environment Programme, which has published an article on its website with a sensationalist title claiming that meat is the world's most urgent problem. Not fossil fuels or nuclear apocalypse. Meat. It makes one wonder how this blatant distortion of reality can be reconciled with the United Nations campaign against online misinformation to protect the vulnerable. In any case, the article highlights that two producers of imitation meat, Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, have been awarded the United Nations' highest environmental honor, the Champion of the Earth Award. In doing so, the United Nations is not only effectively promoting fast food producers, given that these companies are manufacturing highly processed burgers and sausages, but also endorsing extreme agendas. Make no mistake, these companies are not trying to expand choices in the protein market. Their true aim is to eventually eliminate real meat, nothing less. The CEO of Impossible Foods was clear. Livestock are a prehistoric food production technology. Will put the animal agriculture industry out of business. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's likely not that simple, but they certainly seem determined to reach their goal, even if consumers and markets are not really interested. And they can count on massive support. Within the Global Commons Alliance, we also find the EAT Foundation, mentioned earlier in this video, along with an initiative called C40 Cities.
So the reason why there's so much support is because there's so much evidence supporting the healthfulness of plant-based diets, supporting the environmental benefits of plant-based diets, supporting the moral implications of plant-based diets. There's so many things supporting plant-based diets. That's why there's so much support. Not to mention, yes, it can be a great return on investment, seems like.
Within this initiative, here mentioned in a tweet by the United Nations Climate Change account, mayors of more than a dozen of these cities have pledged to implement the planetary health diet for their citizens by 2030. As a reminder, this diet, designed by Harvard's Walter Willett for the EAT Foundation, is semi-vegetarian, allowing only small amounts of animal-based foods. The city's program has established two targets. The first is a progressive goal to reduce all meat and dairy consumption to the levels recommended by the EAT Foundation, with meat consumption particularly low, similar to levels found in low-income countries. The second target is the so-called ambitious one, aiming for zero meat and zero dairy. As extreme as this may seem, it has been endorsed by mayors of global cities, with most of their citizens likely unaware of this commitment. An example is Milan in Italy, of which the mayor Giuseppe Sala was appointed as a member of the advisory board of the EAT Foundation. You see here a tweet of the World Economic Forum explaining how Milan attempts to replace beef ragu with soy imitations in city meals.
Oh no.
Another example is London, with its mayor, Sadiq Khan, serving as the chair of C40 Cities.
It's like that meme where it's like, like meat eaters or like non-vegans when you feed them something vegan and they're like, oh, this is pretty good. And then you tell them it's vegan. They're like, what is this? Are you trying to poison me? It's like, if you don't tell people, it's just good food and they'll eat it and it's fine, right? It's nutritionally adequate. But the second you tell somebody it's vegan, they like spit it out and they're like, I paid for real ground beef animal body parts. It's like, dude, you're sick. And also you're just running off of bias, right? You're not actually forming an opinion based on what you just had, because when you didn't know it was vegan, you didn't have an issue with it.
The city's commitment involves aligning food procurement with the planetary health diet, with a goal of impacting millions of meals per year. Additionally, the mayor plans to ban the advertising of so-called unhealthy foods, which could be used to target meat. Then there's Paris, led by its bourgeois bohemian mayor, Anne Hidalgo. The anti-livestock agenda became evident during the 2024 Olympic Games, when vegetarian options were imposed on athletes and meat was difficult to obtain, much to their dismay.
Oh, no.
New York joined the initiative somewhat later, when Mayor Eric Adams was elected and decided to incorporate his vegan lifestyle into city policy. As mentioned earlier, New York is also home to the CEAP Center at New York University, which is actively working on shaping city policies towards plant-based eating, including proposals for taxing and banning meat.
Oh, this is awesome.
Here is Eric Adams, already at a 2018 meeting of self-proclaimed vegan leaders at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Also present were Gunhild Stordalen, founder of the Eat Foundation, Saudi Prince Khalid Al Walid, a major investor in the vegan tech industry who we encountered in part 2 of the video, Jim Greenbaum of the Greenbaum Foundation, a key supporter of vegan documentaries like Cowspiracy, a sponsor of animal rights groups, an investor in imitation foods, and a funder of the activist journalists at Sentient Media discussed in part 3. Next, we have the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a powerful lobby group for multinationals, as well as the World Resources Institute. Together with the Eat Foundation, they are active within the food and...
I don't know what this is. This is how things get done. This is how shit gets done. This is how policy changes, how politics run. Like, this is how shit gets done, with money and backing and corporations supporting. Like, this is how you get shit done. Right? How much money does the beef and dairy industry put into advertisements, put into lobbying? Tremendous amounts of money. This is how you get shit done.
Land Use Coalition. This coalition was established in 2017 by a core group of influential actors, including the fertilizer giant Yara and the food multinational Unilever. The coalition's management was subsequently taken over by System IQ, a firm founded by former McKinsey executives. Meanwhile, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, in collaboration with the Eat Foundation, also established Fresh. Its members include most of the leading agri-food corporations, as shown in this picture. Both Fresh and the Food and Land Use Coalition trace their origins to Davos-linked circles and were founded around the same time, between 2016 and 2017. Both have Unilever and Yara as core partners. Notably, the World Economic Forum's head of Future of Food is Sean DeClean, ex-Yara. The leading influence in these initiatives was Paul Polman, who served as co-chair of the Food and Land Use Ambassador Network, was CEO of Unilever until 2019, and is a shareholder and director at System IQ. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development often appears in green agenda initiatives, which is ironic given the role of its members in the current highly unsustainable agri-food system. For instance, the WBCSD is part of the Good Life Goals program, alongside the Stockholm Environment Institute and UN Environment. This program aims to develop educational materials to promote sustainable development in schools, with one of its key messages being to cut meat. By now, it should not be hard to guess which products the eliminated meat would need to be replaced with, according to the WBCSD members. There's much more to be said about the WBCSD, but let's refocus on the Food and Land Use Coalition. The coalition's mission is clear. It aims to implement EAT's planetary health diet on a global scale. To achieve this, the coalition has stated that it will deeply engage with the policy, regulatory environment, and businesses of individual countries, targeting regions such as Colombia, Indonesia, Ethiopia, the Nordics, Australia, and Europe. For Australia, this would mean a 90% reduction in red meat consumption, an unrealistic and excessive target. It's hard to imagine that Australians, who cherish their barbecues, will adhere to such a drastic reduction.
Just reading, hold on. What kind of plant-based foods was it? Because there's a study out of Oxford that showed that plant-based diets are on average are 30% cheaper. So I want to know what kind of plant-based foods. $67% more expensive? What are you talking about? Are we talking about just the replacements, like plant-based meats? I mean, maybe, depending on what kind of products and meats, but that's not a plant-based diet. God, I hope it just ends in like silence.
So you can clearly see this is 100% a corporate push towards veganism. Okay, it has.
Wait, Tyson? How is Tyson involved in veganism? Are we talking about the Tyson, like the chicken nuggets, like the Tyson chicken or whatever?
Nothing to do with concerns about animals or anything like that. It's for profit and for control, and consolidating and monopolizing the food market and controlling the food supply. This is what it is about ultimately. Okay, I will make more videos on that, and showing what it really.
Yeah, why does that's a known just last forever? Why does everyone hate Bill Gates? I don't understand. I haven't seen anything really negative about Bill Gates. I don't know why everyone hates Bill Gates.
Is that is pushing and driving veganism, and it's not good. Okay.
No, they're not going to end it with the cows. Yeah, so what this whole documentary is advocating for is, okay, you see all these cows, let's shoot them in the head and slit their throat. That's essentially what they're advocating for. They should have ended this movie with slaughterhouse footage of cows being slaughtered. Yeah, it's no one just lasts forever. I think 90% of any criticism of Bill Gates or of whatever this is, it's all conspiracy theory. It's this idea that there's some kind of agenda trying to restrict your freedoms or trying to actually give you unhealthy food and take away the healthy food, which is apparently grass-fed beef. Wow. What a beautiful ending to such a garbage documentary. I wish on the screen they had like text that said, this whole documentary is advocating for us to enslave and murder these cows on the screen. Like something where it showed you what they're actually advocating for. They're not advocating for that image of cows grazing. They're advocating for that for about a few months to, maybe a year or two, then we're going to kill them all. Jesus. All right. That's funny. Who is that? Iraq war vet. That is funny that a guy on the bottom left has a buzz cut. All right, everybody. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining. This is like horrifically painful. Oh my God. But interesting nonetheless. I'm glad we somewhat finished it. I had to skip it at some point, but really appreciate the stream. Really appreciate the engagement. Thank you for joining, everybody. I'll probably end up streaming next week, a shorter one, just to hang out. I'm 8 years vegan on March 13th. So next week I might do a stream for like an hour and a half or something, just eating some food, hanging out, answering questions, engaging. So if you guys want to join and like talk about whatever, give me like reaction requests, whatever, I'll probably end up doing that because I always like to celebrate every year I'm vegan. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. And it's another year I haven't died from malnutrition. It's another year I haven't uploaded an ex-vegan video. So all positive things. But yeah, appreciate everyone joining, and I will catch you guys on the next stream. Okay, Ellis, LSL. I will let you know. All right. Thank you. All right. See you, everybody.